In association with the AyeWrite Festival, Kaleidoscope Media presents Writing for Graphic Novels, a seminar hosted by Rodge Glass.
I knew nothing about graphic novels before I was approached to write one, and I've totally fallen in love with it since. Okay, so how did Doogie's War come to be? Alright, so my second novel was called Hope for Newborns, and it was set in a kind of fake barbershop in Manchester, and it was about 3 generations of an army family. It was called The Victory Barbershop. It was a book all about whether the British, I use the word advisedly, having been in Scotland for 15 years, the British or the Scots or the English had ever been the good guys in any war. Do we tell ourselves a story about easy good versus evil, which is the number one theme of all graphic novels ever as well. And this was a subject that I became really interested in through a certain small section in the novel that touched on PTSD. And I was approached by Adrian Searle, who was approached me and said, I noticed that you've written about this before. We're interested in doing a graphic novel about PTSD. Are you interested? The first thing we talked about was getting funding and backing for it. Once we had an idea that we were already interested in doing anyway, Adrian had a history of family members with PTSD, and I was interested in subjects to do with war anyway. Then we tried to go and find some funding to be able to get backing for it before we'd even started. And I think a lot of people starting out sometimes get afraid of that because they think that the traditional way that you're supposed to go about things if you're going to be a writer is that you sit in your garret with a long black coat on, rocking back and forth in the corner of the room, and you write regardless of whether anybody is interested, and then you finish something off perfectly, and then you send it off out into the world. Collapse in the publishing industry in the last 10 years has meant that all of those rules are changed. And one of the empowering things for writers is that actually it's a lot more enabling if you want to start something up from the ground. Actually, you don't need permission anymore. You don't need to go and send something off to an agent and hope that Faber are going to take it. Certainly for graphic novels, the independent sector has completely exploded in the last 5 or 10 years. So even though I had no record in graphic novels, we were able to secure funding to be able to put in 3 or 4 months of research with soldiers that had suffered with PTSD. So we got the backing of Veterans Scotland and Poppy Scotland. One of my first tips is, very, very early on in the process, it's important to have a very clear idea of your hero or your anti-hero. Most heroes these days are also anti-heroes. So I was actively searching for my character at the beginning when I was talking to real people. So we went and started asking favours, asking if we could I asked if I could just hang out in the factory. I went to chat to guys at Fife Veterans Association as well, and I found a couple of guys particularly that had served in the Falklands that I found really, really interesting. And although I wanted to write about Iraq and Afghanistan, I thought I could fictionalise this and use an amalgam of some of the guys that I'd met. Okay, so that's how I started to do the research and to get the idea together for Doogie. And there were 2 guys particularly. You can find this really easily on the internet because they both posed with a cardboard cutout of Doogie on release day. I was really worried that they would hate the story because it's quite grim. And they were like, no, let's stand next to him in front of Edinburgh Castle, like that. They were well into it. And the reason was that what I kept hearing early on was they said, we don't really have a voice. Nobody's really interested in telling our story. And so they were keen to speak to me. And it meant that it opened up these channels of communication for the whole process, which was about a year. Now, I had an overall idea of what I wanted to do by this stage. We didn't have anybody to draw it. Next tip, approach graphic novelists directly. I approached Denise Mina, who I do not know, and who's far more successful than me. She did a series of books for DC. She did a series for the Constantine franchise, which is huge. But she lives in Glasgow, so I thought, hell, why not? The most important thing that Denise taught me was that each panel is a paragraph. The most regular problem that people come up against when they are doing all elements themselves is to forget that actually once you've drawn the picture, most of the work that the script would need to do has already been done. It's that really basic show not tell thing that you get in prose but that people hardly ever talk about with graphic novels. Once I'd found my artist, I decided that although I had an overarching story, I thought it would be more alive if we were collaborating on all the details. So I gave him a general idea of where the story was going, but didn't tell him the ending, and we did it section by section. So we did it 10 pages at a time. And I'd recommend also that you think about, no matter the size of what you're looking to make, you think about it in 10 pages at a time. That's basically an episode. And something has to happen on every 2 pages. Stuff has to happen, or graphic novels die, people put them down and go and do something else. Now, so we were thinking in 10-page sections, and I gave Dave the first 10 pages in script form that would look very much like a screenplay. So the next tip is to keep an open mind about what is coming further ahead. Remember, it's not completely in your control. Even if you're doing both the writing and the art elements, your pen will constantly be surprising you. I'm just going to give you one example from this. Mistakes are a beautiful thing. Misunderstanding is a great thing, and I encourage you all to embrace it. So one of the other things that I decided that Doogie wanted to do on his list of stuff to do when he gets home from the war is to bag a Munro. Right? And so I put into the script, Doogie heads up Munro, full kit on, by which I meant, he's got the backpack, and maybe he's got a cap on or something. And Dave read, Doogie wants to bag a Munro, heads up there with full kilt on. And now I can't imagine him having done it without a kilt on. Only, of course, it's a different kind of character that would don a kilt for that sort of event than somebody who wouldn't. And each of these things have an impact on what comes next. One thing that I would advise you not to be totally free about is your ending. In everything that I've ever written, I've always tried to keep a really clear idea from early on about where it's going, or else all that freedom just becomes wandering. You could write for 150 pages and you've not got a story that's going anywhere. And that helped focus us on having pace, movement, forward movement in the story, and always, I hope it feels when you're reading it like you're racing towards Wootton Bassett the whole time. So that next tip is make sure that you know where you're heading to. Every decision we made was based on the thing that we imagined we really wanted to see at the end. And it's been quite a fun journey with it. It was very, very quiet upon publication. And then we were picked up for this summer library reads campaign. And it's often chance that will lead to your little breakthroughs. Everyone know who Doogie Donnelly is. They needed an advert for the summer reads, and we'd only sold a handful of copies at this stage. And bookshops initially had gone, oh, what's this cover? It's a bit dark, it's a bit miserable, it doesn't look like there's many boobs in that, and we got real resistance to it. But when it came to doing this advert and they needed 6 covers for the train, it really stood out from your usual book cover or your usual graphic novel cover. So they chose it. Of those 6, Doogie Donnelly gets involved in the campaign, has to stand by a tree and hold up one of the copies. Lo and behold, there's something with the word Doogie in it, right? So Doogie Donnelly stands in front of a tree holding a copy of Doogie's War. Before you know it, a few hundred copies have been sold. And at the same time, we started getting interest in Europe, where there's particularly in France and in Germany, where there's a larger independent graphic novel tradition. They were less put off by the hybrid element. And we started getting to invited to do more things, and a few things abroad, and it's kind of steadily grown and grown as time has gone on.
What was the biggest frustration in producing this?
His biggest frustration with me was that I didn't think about things like, there are thousands of people at Hamden, because I don't think like a filmmaker. I think in arty-farty, head in the clouds, lyrical, prosy visuals, which is a very different thing. It's like, yeah man, it's all about metaphors. It's not really a crowd, it's like what the crowd represents. And he's going, nah, do you want me to do 1,000 people or not? So that was the most frustrating thing from his side. From my side, it was simply that we couldn't make it longer. I think it's way too short. And in order for the narrative arc to be more satisfying, for the whole thing to work better, it should have been 150 pages. But we couldn't.
Did that come down to financing?
Yeah, we couldn't. Finances and time, we couldn't do 150 pages. We didn't have anywhere near the amount of money it would have cost to make that. If anybody wants to ask anything afterwards or get in contact, I'm really easy to find. I'm just rodgeglass@hotmail.com, or I'm at rodgeglass.com, and you can email me through my site. So if you do graphic novel work in the future, or you've got other questions and you want to get in contact, please do.
This has been a Kaleidoscope Media production. Copyright 2012.